Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on AI and human judgment, building trustworthy automation without losing accountability. Artificial intelligence is no longer a futuristic concept. It's here, influencing decisions in finance, accounting, healthcare, education, and increasingly in management. While AI can enhance speed and efficiency, it also raises some really important questions. Some of those would be, are we seeing better outcomes, or are we unintentionally harming performance? How do we keep humans accountable for decisions that are partly or fully automated? And what does it mean to build trust in a technology that many of us don't fully understand? So our conversation today will explore these kinds of questions, and we'll hear from my colleagues who will share insights about accountability, transparency, ethics, and future skills that we'll need to thrive in an AI-driven world. Our goal isn't just to debate the risks and rewards of AI, but to consider how we, in various roles, can shape technology to enhance human judgment and not to replace it. So with that, let's start off by meeting our panelists. I'll start off. I am Angela Jackson. I teach here at the Organizational Leadership Department at the Woodbury School of Business here at UVU. And then let's go ahead and start with Eugene and then just move down the line. Dr. Seeley.
I'm Eugene Seeley. I'm professor of international business here at UVU. I've been here for about 30 years. I chair the Organizational Leadership Department as well as do research on student success and international business topics.
Hello, I'm Sylvia Clark, and I teach human resources in the Department for Organizational Leadership. I also teach organizational behavior. Yeah, that's it.
Let's see, which one do we need to? I know one's a room mic and this one is. Oh, okay.
My name is Noah Myers. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Accounting, also in the Woodbury School of Business.
My name is Jeff Peterson. I'm an associate professor of organizational leadership and the director of the MBA program here at UVU.
Hi, I'm Rachel Hutchings. I am a professional in residence in the Department of Strategic Management and Operations, and I am our department's AI specialist.
Okay, thank you. And then just a note, we'll have time for questions afterwards from the audience. So keep track of those, and then we'll just dive in with our first question here. We're starting off with Dr. Clark. We'll go with first name Sylvia. So we're talking about the trust dilemma to start off. How do we balance the efficiency of AI-driven decisions with the need for human judgment and oversight?
Okay, so I think this is a really important question because as AI keeps to continue to transform the way we work, it really challenges us to think about where efficiency ends and where human judgment must begin. So AI can process fast amounts of data, right, in seconds, and it can identify patterns that humans may never see. But there's one thing that AI really lacks, and that is it doesn't have human judgment, right? So trust and ethical integrity really require something that AI doesn't have, like I said, that human judgment. It doesn't have that. So when decision affects people's lives and livelihoods, it's really important that it doesn't come at the cost of fairness, empathy, or compassion, right? So let me share a few ways I wrote down that I think can strike the balance here. And keep in mind, I teach human resources, so most of my examples are from my field. So first, we have to recognize the tension between efficiency and empathy. So AI brings efficiency, right? So it can scan thousands of resumes, detect turnover trends, and forecast performance metrics very easily, much faster than any human team ever could. But efficiency doesn't always equal wisdom. So algorithms can miss context or compassion. For example, an AI system might reject a candidate because he or she has a gap in employment history. So only a human can, for example, see that there's a gap because some caretaking responsibilities or medical leave or something like that. So the balance here comes from letting AI handle the heavy data work, while humans can interpret the why behind the data. So efficiency is measurable, but empathy is meaningful. And it's really important to note here that both matter if we want decisions that are not just fast, but also fair and sustainable. Then second, what we also need is something that is called the human in the loop principle. So we need to make sure that we keep people involved in decision making, especially in high stakes decisions, right? So not just at the very beginning, but also throughout the entire process. So think of AI as an advisor, not as an arbiter. So it can surface insights or flag risks, for example, but the last final call should always be made by a human who understands the organizational culture, the ethical context, and the broader implications. So take performance reviews, for example, in my field. AI might highlight sales numbers or project completion rates, but humans must also recognize things like innovation, teamwork, collaboration, and things like that. Mentoring, for example, right? These are things that AI really can't assess that well. And third, there's the issue of trust through accountability. And I believe Eugene is going to talk a little bit more about that later. But people are more likely to trust AI when they know that humans are responsible for the outcomes. So if something goes wrong, we say, for example, a biased result of some kind, like, right, an unfair rejection of applicants. So there must be a person who is responsible or who takes ownership for this outcome, not just an algorithm that's hidden behind a screen. I have this really interesting metaphor here. So think of it like a co-pilot, right? So we feel comfortable with a co-pilot because we know there's still a human pilot in the cockpit, right? So that's what's really important here. Okay, one more maybe. So we should also be mindful of the risk of over-reliance. And I think this applies to all of us. I've caught myself relying a lot on AI lately. So AI is really powerful, but when we stop questioning its output, then we fall into automation bias, which means we believe that the output is always right? But not necessarily so. So on the flip side, if we're overly skeptical, we risk rejecting useful innovation. So the goal is calibrated trust here. So knowing when to rely on AI and when we need to step in. So to bring this all together, think of recruitment, again, from my field. AI can quickly screen resumes, very quickly. It can identify matches and it can flag potential fits. But the final interview, so the chance to evaluate someone's adaptability, someone's motivation and cultural fit, that's still being done by a human. Because without that human layer, we may hire someone who fits the data, but who doesn't fit the team. So that's really crucial here. So my takeaway here is ethical AI isn't just about choosing between human and machine. It's about designing systems that work together well. So AI should handle the data-driven efficiency, and humans should uphold the context, the values, and the empathy. So trust emerges when AI amplifies human judgment, so not when it replaces it.
Thank you so much, Celia. I got my brain going. If anyone else has anything they want to add as we're going along, please jump in. Once we've talked about this dilemma, this tension, finding that balance you've talked about, Sylvia, the natural next question becomes, who's actually responsible when these systems can fail? And so Eugene is going to talk to us about who's responsible when AI-enabled decisions go wrong.
So sounds like it's on, but it's quiet. It's on. Okay. So the question of who's responsible when AI goes wrong, the answer is rather simple. The courts will figure it out. And I mean that literally. And so there's a recent case in Florida where, about 8 years ago, a Tesla on autopilot where the driver was intoxicated, crashed and killed somebody. And the court determined that the driver was 67% responsible for the death, and Tesla's AI system was 33% responsible. That's a very specific outcome. So in these cases where there's a very negative outcome and a court will be making a decision, they will ultimately come to decision. But I think what's informative of this is that if you look at the history of engineering and culpability in engineering, so in the United States, there is you are responsible for your engineering mistakes. So that if you design a car that has a gas tank right in the back and it gets rear-ended and blows up a lot, if it was an honest mistake, you're still getting sued and you're still responsible. And if it was intentional, it's even worse. If you go to Europe and Japan and you can show that, so sorry, we made a mistake as engineers, we never intended this. If we had realized it, we would have fixed it. You get a pass on the first mistake and you can't do it again. So this difference is cultural and a lot of other reasons behind it. But I think we'll end up seeing that in cases of culpability for errors in AI, we will probably see this split where in the US, we're more likely to put blame on the system and its design. Whereas in other countries, they're probably more saying, okay, this is the first time this has ever happened. Don't let it happen again. And the lawsuit or whatever might be much more modest. I think the Tesla one, it was $240 million settlement for the 33%. I don't know where that poor driver is going to come up with the $500,000 or $500 million to pay his part. But anyway, so I think when we look at that, that's where we're going to be in the courts. If you look at individual decisions in looking in the business world, if you're making a marketing decision or a business investment decision, you're ultimately, as the person making the decision based on AI, the one responsible. So you won't be able to go to your investors and say, hey, don't fire me as CEO. It wasn't my mistake. It was AI's. You're going to bear responsibility for that. So that's kind of the two different areas we're looking at. If you're looking at something that goes to a court, it will be interesting to follow how the decisions flow. And the expectation is in the US, there will be a greater expectation of responsibility for the designers of the AI systems and the companies that own and run them than in other countries in the world. But if you go to the personal decisions made in the company and things like that, ultimately, if a human pushes the button, that human will be responsible for those decisions that were proposed by AI.
Thank you, Eugene. So we've got this accountability being one piece. Then we have also organizations are seeing real performance implications. So let's talk to Jeff about this. Just talking about AI's impact on these performances and why are some organizations reporting poor performance after adopting AI? And what can we learn from these cases?
All right. Thanks, Angela. So this is a very interesting question. So the first question that comes up is, so does AI actually make people more productive? Now, any of my students will know that from organizational behavior, the answer to almost every question is, it depends. And so as we try to look at this question of, is it making us more productive or not, we have to get pretty deep into some concepts. One of the first concepts that comes up, I apologize, I'm going to get philosophical about this, but the first question is like, so what is performance? How do we define what performance is? So I teach a whole class in the MBA, and we struggle with this idea. So how do I measure somebody's performance? Is it the outcome? Is it what happens? Is it people's behaviors? So, for example, if we had somebody who was the highest, the top performing manager in the company, and yet they were abusing employees and forcing them to work extra hours and stuff like that, we would easily recognize that there's a problem with that person's performance. But how do we codify all those things so that we can look and say, if we're using AI, is it actually resulting in the kind of performance that we want? So there's a couple of articles I think that are really good in looking at this. So one place where AI has proved to be very useful is in programming. So a lot of programmers now are using AI as a way to do that. In fact, so I have a smart home, and there's a program I use called Home Assistant, and it uses a language called YAML to do stuff. I don't want to learn YAML. So I go to ChatGPT and I say, these are the things that I want to have this do, and then it generates code for me, and I try it, and sometimes it runs and sometimes it doesn't, and various different things. But that makes it a lot easier for me because I don't have to learn the YAML language to be able to do that. Well, they did a study where they took some of these programmers and they asked them to estimate how much time would be saved by using AI, and they estimated about a 24% improvement in that. When they actually ran the study, there was a 19% decrease in performance. And as they kind of examined this, they realized that even within that, it depends. What they found was a couple of the programmers were actually very skillful already in using AI, and the AI that they were using actually improved their performance. The ones who didn't understand AI as well had a decrease in their performance. So this comes back to a big question that we keep having is, how much of a foundation of knowledge do you have to have before you can actually effectively use that? So if I decided I wanted to do surgery on somebody, and I said, AI, explain to me the steps of doing the surgery, it's very different for me to do that than it is a doctor who's already done thousands of surgeries and knows things. And so it's very difficult to simply say, well, AI is going to provide this, because each person is bringing a different set of skills to using that. So that's what the one study found, that AI had very different effects on people depending on the amount of underlying knowledge that they already had. The second study, which I think was really interesting, was where they discovered that AI did make people more productive, but it had some side effects, which was when you went to a non-AI task, that your intrinsic motivation went down and your boredom went up. So you could think about this like, so maybe I run a landscaping business, and so I'm using AI to generate all these models of how I could lay stuff out, and then I figure out what's the exact right chemical composition to make this lawn grow and put all that. That's great. And then it comes time where I have to weed, and I have to go out and pull weeds by hand. Well, pulling weeds by hand now is an incredibly boring thing compared to doing all this stuff with AI. So it may be that what happens is when you're doing the AI stuff, you're very engaged with working with it, and then when you have to go back to doing stuff the old-fashioned way, it saps all of your motivation and you become bored and don't want to do that, right? So some of the things we have to think about is, do we regulate where and when we want people to be using AI? So these are tasks that AI would be good for. These are tasks that it would not. And then one of the things that we're trying to do as a business school is, and Noah can probably attest to this, so in accounting, they're now expecting people to show up with good AI skills right when they hire them, right? So what we need to be doing in the business school is teaching people how to use AI, because they're expected to be able to use it, but if they just show up and all they know is, well, I started doing my homework using ChatGPT, it's going to be very different than if somebody says, here's an assignment, I want you to use a model to do this. And some of the faculty will do things like, they're not concerned necessarily as much with the output that you get, but they want to see, what questions did you ask the AI? What were the prompts that you were giving to it? Because that is more important than actually did you get the right answer or what answer did you get. People need to learn how to ask the right kinds of questions. And sometimes you'll see with an AI model, you'll ask a question, and then it's the recursive questions. You say, yes, but what about this? And the AI learns from that set of transactions. You need to teach people how to do that. And as Angela said, we can't just rely 100% on just trying to turn stuff over to AI. We have to understand what AI is doing for us. I think back when, I was doing all my stats, and when they made me calculate stats by hand, and I thought, this is so stupid that I'm never going to do this by hand. But what happens is when I run a statistical analysis and it spits out some kind of garbage to me, I know this can't be right, because I understand what this is supposed to be doing underneath it. I don't have to keep doing that, but I have to at least understand what it's supposed to be doing with that. So is AI making us more productive? Yes. Is it making us less productive? Also, yes. And so we need to learn how to use it in a way so that we don't end up with decreases in that productivity, and figure out, where do we do it? How do we do it? Because it's definitely going to be here, but we're still making mistakes and using it for things we shouldn't and not using it for things that we should. So,
Thank you, Jeff. And this kind of links into this next question, links into what you're saying in terms of part of the answer may lie in whether people understand how these systems actually make decisions and learning the process along the way. So coming back to Sylvia, we're going to talk about the transparency and explainability issues. How important is it for employees, managers, and stakeholders to understand how AI arrived at a decision?
Okay. So I think this question goes right to the heart of trust in AI, because we often say that transparency builds trust, right? And I really believe that people can't trust what they don't understand. That's my belief. So if AI is shaping that decisions that impact people's careers, opportunities, or even reputations, we have a responsibility to make those decisions understandable and explainable, right? So first, let's talk about what's often called the black box problem. So many AI systems, especially the more complex ones like the deep learning models, for example, right? They operate in ways that aren't easily understandable or even visible, right? So they process enormous amounts of data and generate outcomes, but they don't always show how they got there. So even if the result is technically correct, when employees or managers don't understand why, it can feel arbitrary, or even biased. So when something feels like it's arbitrary, trust erodes, right? So part of ethical AI design is demystifying the black box problem. So helping people see the logic behind it and understand it, what's behind the outcome. So second, transparency is critical for employee acceptance. So when AI is used in areas like performance reviews, for example, or promotions or hiring, employees want to know why certain decisions were made. Understanding the reason behind these decisions doesn't just reduce resistance, it also builds ownership and learning. So if someone knows my performance score was lower because of missed project deadlines, they're more likely to take action than if you just give them a number without any explanation. So it shifts the conversation from suspicion to improvement, to self-improvement. So in short, clarity drives commitment. And then one more point why transparency is also important. It empowers managerial oversight as well, right? So leaders can't effectively supervise what they don't understand. So explainable AI allows managers to see which variables or patterns influence the decision. So this means they can question, interpret, and contextualize before they act on it. Without explainability, managers risk becoming passive consumers of AI outcomes rather than active decision makers. So that's risky because if something goes wrong, like we've already talked about, there has to be someone who's accountable for it. So the managers are still accountable. So it's not just a technical issue, it's also a leadership issue. And then lastly, transparency is also about communication. So organizations, they need to translate technical outcomes into a language that people can understand. So that means moving beyond code or confidence scores or whatever. You want to offer a user-friendly language or explanation. So for example, instead of saying your application got declined, a transparent system might say your application was declined because your credit history is much shorter than our minimum threshold, for example, right? Similarly, in HR, I have to give you one HR example, of course. So if an algorithm flags like a new parent as someone with high turnover risk, a manager needs to know why. Is it really a risk, or is it like based on something temporary, like lower engagement scores or work overload or something else? So they need to know, these managers, so they can use it to act thoughtfully, right, with this information. So to make this a little bit more concrete, imagine an AI system that recommends who should be considered for promotion. If it simply produces a list of people who are recommended for promotion, people are going to question that list, right? Why are these people on the list and why are others not on the list? But if it explains that these employees were identified based on their consistent high performance, on leadership evaluations, and maybe some collaboration across departments or whatever, cross collaboration, then it opens the door for dialogue, not mistrust. So that's really important. So my key takeaway here is that transparency isn't optional anymore. It's the bridge between AI accuracy and human judgment or human trust, I mean. So when people can see and understand how a decision was made, they're more likely to accept it, learn from it, and improve through it. So in the end, explainability isn't just nice to have anymore. It's kind of a must. So transparency and explainability. So it's how we ensure that AI supports human understanding rather than replacing it.
Can I actually jump in there for a second? I want to just say that I really like the black box discussion, because that's really what these things are. We don't really understand, and I couldn't begin to explain how the models actually work. And I just want to give one more concrete example just to try and drive home the point that Sylvia made. In my class I teach, I've started to teach in one of the advanced accounting classes that I teach how to do basic computer programming, which is very weird. And students are like, wait, what am I? I'm an accounting major. And we're learning that computer programming is actually an area where we're seeing a lot of AI kind of eating the earlier job market and making it harder for people to get jobs. But in terms of making something transparent, what you can do is if you use these AI models to do some data analysis, anyone uploaded like a spreadsheet or some data up to one of these programs, it can do really cool things and give you charts and graphs and analyses. And then you have to really ask, okay, can I get from point A to point B again? Can I do that again? And you do it again, you'll get a different analysis, right? They're not deterministic tools. So here's the key to help make it transparent. You can see the code that it's actually writing. In ChatGPT, for example, you just click the little analysis button at the end of something, and it will actually give you the Python code that it wrote to do that analysis. And in that case, you have a really cool trail, an audit trail, is the way I think about it from an accounting standpoint. There's a way you can see, copy paste that code, and you can actually now have a process to get from point A to point B. And it kind of solves that black box issue. You don't know how it wrote the code still, but if you just need a process that brings your data from point A to point B, that copying of that code can help get you there. And so I think paradoxically, understanding a little bit about computer programming is becoming more important for a lot of people in business, accounting, finance, and the business world, because they're going to need that in order to oversee these tools.
Thank you, Noah. And thank you, Sylvia. Oh,
Okay, you can have that one.
This one's
We can share.
here. Thanks, Noah. I loved that. I love that clarity about the black box, and also clarity drives commitment. That's great. That I wrote that down. When these decisions that these systems are making are misunderstood or opaque, as opposed to being clear, then we also have some embedded biases that might show up. So let's talk about that dimension. Let's go back to Jeff. And the question is, Are we unintentionally embedding bias into our decision-making systems, and how can we detect that and correct it? I think that will kind of jump into what Noah was saying as well.
Yeah, so this is still building again on that black box system, right? So one thing that we understand about human beings is, as much as we would like to deny it, human beings are subject to bias a lot. We're human decision making, human behavior, bias plays into that a lot. So one of the reasons when AI first started to become popular is people said, well, we can't use, we can use it for analyzing data, but we can't let AI make decisions because, humans are much better at making decisions. But as we watched it, we realized human beings are so subject to bias that AI actually often made better decisions than humans did because it took that bias out. Now, as we've been developing these models over the years, I don't know how much people know about the way that AI works, right? But AI is, we call it intelligence, but really what it is, it's a system of pattern recognition. So it's going out and pulling other kinds of data that's already there and coming up with relationships, and it learns from what somebody else already did or said or that. So it's not like it's truly generating new things on its own. So for example, if I told it, this is the system that we're using to make decisions about who to promote, and these are the people that we considered, these are the people we promoted, look through that and figure out an algorithm that would repeat that same thing that we did. So the advantage for that is you now have sped up the process of identifying people and promoting people. But if those people were promoted through human biases that we weren't aware of, then what happens is AI just learns those biases. So if we had a company that, for example, favored promoting men over women, and we say, go back and analyze what we've done over the past 5 years, then we've got a biased AI system, and we, again, being a black box, we don't know why it's making recommendations. So how do we get past that when the biases sometimes are invisible to us ourselves? We don't even realize that they're there. And that becomes one of the big challenges, is we have to be careful what we're feeding into AI. So if all we're doing is looking to have it speed up what we were doing, we just make bad decisions faster. So we have to figure out ways to help it teach us. It's efficient. It's efficient. At least we're not wasting time. But we need to go back and figure out different things. So maybe we need to be asking AI about what things actually, again, are, coming back to perform, actually lead to performance, because sometimes things that we think are leading to performance actually aren't leading to performance, and other things are. So we have to be building these models. And there was one other article, and I wasn't sure whether to talk about it here or talk about it there, but from my first question, but this kind of hits again on what Sylvia was saying as well. One of the things that people are starting to do is use AI for doing things like monitoring people at work. So for example, you can use AI to see if you're at a call center, like how long are you on the call? What's your turnover rate? But what has happened is people started to use that for doing things even like tracking how long your breaks are. And so what's happened is people's performance has actually become worse when they are monitored very heavily by AI. And so there were lawsuits that happened during COVID about monitoring people during test taking and different kinds of things that go on with that. So I think we have to be careful to not turn these kinds of things over to AI. Sylvia also mentioned this idea of writing performance reviews. What the data shows is that performance reviews actually are much more complete. There's more to it when AI does it or whatever. So maybe the performance review is actually better, but people don't receive the performance review very well when it comes from AI, right? So even if you get a really good performance review, but you reject it because it's just some stupid AI that's doing it, or it's not, so there's some real challenges around that. So those are some things that I think we have to be careful of. Is we can't assume that every AI model is fair and biased from the start. We have to be careful, make sure we're feeding it the right kinds of stuff so that it comes up with fair kinds of things, because again, in programming, we have a thing where we say it's garbage in, garbage out. If you give the AI garbage, you're going to get garbage back out of it. So
Thank you, Jeff. So we've talked about up until now some of the risks and highlighted those as well. But we can learn from some of the sectors that have already, they're further along in the adoption of this. And so we're going to turn to Noah now and ask him what management can learn from areas like finance, accounting, HR, where AI is already being used extensively.
Yeah, so when I think about where we are right now in this wave of AI adoption, I mean, like, try and imagine, if you can, 30 years ago, the internet coming out, and it was just the Wild West. We didn't know what it was. You could download the whole thing onto your computer at the time. I mean, there was that much out there, which seems crazy. That's where we're at right now. Nobody has any idea really where this is going. Everyone's throwing things at the wall and hoping something sticks. And so we're just trying to learn from a few things that are successful. It doesn't mean it's going to be successful in a few years. But there's kind of two threads. One is organizations haven't seen a lot of benefit in terms of ROI, like measurable output and ROI. We can't say, look, they're getting a lot more efficient because they spent more adopting these AI tools. But individuals, when a study looks at individual performance evaluations, there's a lot of really good evidence that individuals can do a lot better. They can do more, they can do it better, and they can do it in less time. And so there's a paradox there of, well, what's really going on? And one of the takeaways is it's hard to take individual performance and map it out to organizational gains, right? If all of a sudden marketing is doing really well because they're just using AI and they're really tightening down their process and getting to a point where they can target customers better and be on the cutting edge of what AI can do, but there's still a legal step in the process for client acceptance and they have to go through legal review, that's still a 3-week period of time. It's not going to show organizational benefits. The marketing team just basically has more time on their hands. They're learning more. The individuals are benefiting. And so there's really two perspectives that I don't know much about the organizational perspective. I don't talk about enterprise AI. There are companies out there selling very expensive tools that can take all of your data and suck it up into a new model. And then the company can actually use a chatbot trained on internal documents, which is really powerful and cool. I don't know how to do all of that. What I know and what I think we're expert at doing here is taking individual human capital and saying, look, you do things, you do tasks, you perform tasks on a job. Some of those are much higher value than others. And those low value tasks are usually ones you can hand off. And so learn how to hand those off. And a lot of it is just practice. I mean, once you start using these tools, you get to a point where you think, oh, I could use AI for this. Or you'll think, oh, it's not going to save me any time. I'm going to do it myself because I know the state of the art and it's just not there. And so you just have to think about AI as it's not just a new tool. It's change management is a term from my profession in accounting. When we would audit a company, you had to manage changes in order to make sure certain things didn't get entered in that shouldn't. We're having to change everything. The processes that run most of the world can be augmented and improved with AI. We just have to manage that change. And so that's one way to think about it as organizational versus individual perspective.
Thank you so much, Noah. I love, now we're bringing in this, we've talked about everything, learning from the practice. What Noah's talked about has shown us that obviously the human role remains central. So how do we design that collaboration with AI? And so now we finally get to hear from Rachel. We're going to ask you about this human AI collaboration. What does effective collaboration between humans and machines look like? And where should we, I think Sylvia brought this up, the human in the loop. Did you talk about that? Someone brought that in, or maybe it was you. Yes. So where should the human in the loop be?
I was looking at some recent data from this, and basically the answer is, at least for the foreseeable future, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that definition is all over the map. Part of it is context specific. Part of it is that the technology is rapidly changing. So that point on the spectrum is a moving target. Another interesting thing I found is that there was a recent study that was done, and they looked at where things were at in different industries with collaboration. And they found that there isn't a whole lot of true collaboration going on. things usually fall into one of two camps. Either the interaction between human and AI is actually supervised automation, or there's some sort of AI assisted work. So at this point, I think a lot of our decisions with collaboration or human in the loop are going to fall into one of those two camps. And when we're thinking of that, there are 4 different types of models that experts are looking at for human involvement. And the first one is traditional human in the loop, and they define that as where humans approve all AI actions. Then there is the human in the loop for exceptions, where AI is handling all the routine stuff, and then a human is handling those edge cases that are escalated up to the human. Then there's human on the loop, which is where humans have supervisory oversight, and then human out of the loop, where it's fully autonomous. So it's figuring out in different contexts what makes sense. And I think that effective collaboration is then always honing in and reiterating, making sure that that process is actually working. There are some hidden problems with all of these things. One of those is alert fatigue. If you've got a human that is reviewing decisions of an AI, and you've got a lot of these decisions, there is a lot of fatigue that goes with that. So humans become rubber stampers. That can lead to another problem where you've got this trap that we are way too easily falling into of de-skilling. So if AI is handling all the routine cases, then humans start to lose pattern recognition skills. And then we start to lose the ability to even really review cases when needed, because we do not have the fine tuning of those skills to weigh in and be an expert in a situation. We also get complacency with automation. There's been a lot of documentation with aviation where pilots that rely on autopilot start to lose manual skills. And that's a long time example, so it's pretty easy to look at that and apply it to some of these newer emerging situations. And then I think Eugene touched on this, but we've got the accountability shell game. When something goes wrong with an AI, who gets the blame? Is it the AI? Is it the person who made the decision to, or didn't make the decision to rubber stamp what the AI had done, or is it the company? So there's a lot of gray area that I think is always moving. Part of what we need to decide to be effective is what is really important. Is it a high stakes situation? We should have a human in that area. Is it a situation where edge cases are common and the consequences are high? Throw a human in there. Is it something that is very, very routine and outliers are few and far between? It's a lot easier to feel comfortable with taking the human out of that loop a little bit more. So kind of what it's all falling down to right now is having a really clear division of labor. What are the situations where clear AI involvement makes sense, like data processing, pattern recognition, those types of things. And then when we have ethical decisions, when there is a creative evaluation, we want to make sure we've got humans in there. But even that division of labor needs to be continually reassessed because the technology is emerging. So, complicated answer.
I think they all are, but that got my thinking so much about so many things, and especially this ethical piece. We're going to turn to. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yes,
on that first? So this is something that came up with some of our MBA faculty. So people were using using generative AI to come up with recommendations and things, and then so they would present that to the faculty member and say, here is our recommendation. And then what the faculty member did is start to push back down through that to try to understand the stuff that was underneath. And what happened was the student was immediately stopped because they didn't understand anything other than what had been generated by the AI, right? So if you are trying to convince your executives to do something and the whole process has been just you getting AI to spit something out, if you don't have that ability to understand what's going with back, talk about like what Noah talked about, you don't understand what's in that data, how it arrived at that data, you're not going to survive. So no CEO is going to accept the answer of like, well, that's what the AI said. They're going to expect that you can explain what's there. So it becomes a tool because there are things where you can ask it, identify these patterns that might take somebody days and weeks. We had an example of a student who was doing an internship. They gave him a thing and said, I need you to do this over, it'll probably take you a couple of weeks to analyze this data. He came back 2 hours later and says, I'm done. And they say, you can't be done. And he's like, well, yes. And he showed them how he'd put it into AI, and it had analyzed all this data that would have taken somebody several weeks to do, but it did a great job on that. But now what they had was a bunch of data from which they could make decisions. They weren't saying, AI, tell me what should I do. They were using it as ways to process mountains of data into human usable kinds of things, right? So people can't just expect that you can let AI go on important things if you can't explain what it did. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. Moving on to talking about more now the ethical boundaries and guardrails. This has kind of been an issue all the way through our discussion. But Eugene, the question is, how do we decide which decisions should never be fully automated regardless of AI capability?
Well, I think to kind of summarize some of the things that have already been mentioned, especially Rachel, if you frame this in the sense of extremes, like you have routine data, analyses that are done, low stakes decision making, AI is great for that. Humans get fatigued, and AI can run through a lot of data. And if it's low stakes, that's fine. If you have very high stakes decisions, then humans need to be involved in that. Although I've seen many sci-fi movies that have a AI agent deciding court decisions, whether someone will live or die or what will happen to them. That's something that we would never, for example, a murder trial, ever expect AI to make the decision of life or death for a person, or lifetime imprisonment, or what have you. So those kind of decisions will always be done by humans. Then we have the case of, well, where do we draw that line? Or what types of decisions should always be done by humans, and what shouldn't, from an ethical point of view? I mean, there's effectiveness. We could, if a company makes a bad decision, they lose money, and their competitors can make up the gap. But if you have decisions that are very high stakes for individuals, of course, criminal trials are a good example, but also decisions that many politicians have to make as leaders of countries, of moving in new directions that really don't have enough historical basis just to say AI can tell me, what to do here. Because those affect millions of people, will always be in the hands of people to make those decisions. I know they say, history repeats itself, and Mark Twain is attributed with saying that it doesn't really repeat itself, but it rhymes. There are certainly many examples of that, but then there are also many examples of us facing things we've never faced before. And AI will give it a go and give you an answer. Yeah, I think, this is from this and this, you should do this. But it can't anticipate things. It can't anticipate everything. And it really is just a good historian rather than someone who can synthesize current trends and decide how we should go forward. And so those high impact decisions, those really need to be made by humans, and always will be, because AI, again, is a great historian. It's great on looking at existing data, but where do we go from here? How do we move forward? Those decisions will always be in the hands of people.
Thank you so much, Eugene.
Eugene can. So I know that Eugene drives a Tesla. So this was an issue that came up when you start looking at like ethical questions around things like, so if you're in a car accident and you would be expected to drive in a way to try to save yourself. So nobody would fault somebody if you ended up killing somebody else because you were naturally just trying to save your own life in that, right? But what do you do when you have a car that's driving? How does the car then make that decision? Would you tell the car, like, your priority is to save your driver, even if it kills other people? Or would you tell it, you need to try to calculate what's the least number of people that gets killed by this, and if that kills your driver, then that's perfectly fine. So
The trolley problem.
yeah, it's a trolley problem. So, or the iRobot is that whole thing, right? So those become very difficult questions when you have the morality of saying, well, if we look at this from a utilitarian standpoint, we would say, well, certainly, whichever causes the least number of people to die is the thing that we should do, right? But it's not a simple kind of thing to program that kind of stuff in there. And we might see AI doing things that we look at and say, oh my gosh, this is clearly unethical, that it could somehow reason was ethical based on some framework that, because there are multiple ways to analyze any problem ethically, and you may end up with different answers depending on which perspective you're using, whether it's a rights-based thing or a utilitarian or a virtue. So you can't really expect AI to be employing virtue ethics, making decisions about stuff. So it's going to be a tricky thing as we ask it to do human-like things without any kind of human morality. And the question is, can it somehow develop human morality, and then whose morality? So they're tricky questions. So
Too many questions. No, they're all great questions. The next question we have is talking about this idea of when people do see those strong ethical boundaries being utilized, obviously from organizations and people rather than AI, but when they see that, it can help build trust. So how do we foster that trust inside an organization? So we're turning to Rachel again now to ask what strategies can help employees trust those AI assisted decisions rather than resist them.
This is a question that I've been looking a lot at in the past year and a half or so, both here at the university when we're looking at bringing AI more and more into our university ecosystem, but then also out in the workforce when we're looking at AI transformation strategies within businesses. And the thing that I find interesting is that issues often usually come from two directions. Sylvia mentioned one of them. It's that we don't trust what we don't understand. And that's important, actually. Evolution has created us that way to keep us out of trouble. So hopefully we have that instinct that stays to protect us. Another issue is that problems, whether they are AI problems or otherwise, are often actually leadership or strategy problems that are masked as something else. So you kind of have to dig into understanding what the true problems are to be able to adequately address those and move forward positively and proactively. So a few of the things, some of them we talk often about, they're job security concerns. There's resistance because people see AI reducing headcount. And that's real. That's a real fear. There are knowledge gaps. We don't know, and it's changing so rapidly, it's overwhelming to keep up with our upskilling, or we don't know where to start. There are some trust deficits, sometimes well-founded, sometimes not, with our organizations. Anxiety with skills, again, rapidly changing, that type of thing. There are things we don't talk about as much, like increased surveillance. People don't want that. AI is changing that world big time, and it's uncomfortable. So we have all these things, and understanding the underlying problem is really, really key. We've talked about, Sylvia, I think this was you as well, that transparency builds trust. And that is the same, I think, across all types of change management, whether it's um, general tech change strategy, whether it's AI, whether it's um, corporate structure change, all those things. Transparency is really, really key. Um, we've found that with AI, some of the principles that have held true in other types of change still do. Bringing in skeptics early on is one of the best things that can happen for several reasons. This can address their fears early on, but oftentimes they have very valid points that maybe others have not considered. Sometimes the skeptics are the ones that see something hidden in the corner that the early adopters don't see because we're excited. And so maybe we don't spend as much time digging in on the issues. So bringing them in on that is really critical. We need different voices to come to the table. And then once they're in, you have a true advocate for that change. Or you decide not to go with that change because they've been involved. Comprehensive training is another key. Making people confident in the use of that new technology is important with buy-in and how they feel about organizational change. Gradual rollout, any change. I mean, we see that with things like weight loss, building new habits. Same goes for AI. Small incremental changes are the things that hold, and it's not as scary. One small step. Honest communication, again, that transparency piece. I find it a lot easier to trust something's going on when they're showing us what's happening and then being really honest about what isn't working. And also, one of the things I think we don't do enough of, and we're seeing this happen in industry, just because AI works doesn't mean it's the right choice. So whether it's predicting or looking back, playing the Monday morning quarterback, looking at, okay, so it works or we think it will work, but what is the counter argument? If we don't spend the money and time on this change of adding AI and put that time and money into something else, what could the result be, or what would have the result been? Can we do something as effective or even more so by doing something else? And I think it's a lot easier as humans to trust when you see that type of decision making and analysis, or even get to be involved in that process. So just being very intentional and transparent, I think, are really the two biggest things.
Thank you, Rachel. So we've talked about all these amazing aspects of AI and in our past and what we're struggling with and what we're succeeding with. And now let's look ahead. If this is the world that we're moving into, what skills will leaders need to thrive? So as we end this section with questions, we'll turn to Noah and ask him, what skills will future managers and professionals need to evaluate, oversee, and even challenge, like Rachel was just saying, AI-driven recommendations?
Well, I know we're out of time, right, at 2, so do I need to rush through this? 2:15, okay, then we're good with some time. Then I will take just a second to dig in. I think that as I look around the room, forgive me if I'm judging anyone, it looks like we have a lot of students in here, at least a majority of students. And so I'm going to try and kind of keep my remarks focused towards students, because if you're here for that reason, you're trying to learn a little bit about AI, how is this going to impact my career? It's, I think, understandable to be worried about it. AI is definitely changing the job market and the landscape in accounting. We're seeing, especially from some of the bigger firms that have figured this out, they've explicitly stated, yeah, we're not hiring nearly as much now. We've figured out essentially how to reduce headcount through AI. And so the points that I would make in terms of how do you become a leader, how do you use these skills to your advantage, is to double down on some domain-specific knowledge. If you're in accounting, for example, I tell my students, you still need to learn the stuff that the AI can do so that, as you've heard multiple times here, you do it better. Even if it can do it faster, and yeah, sometimes it finds the stuff faster, you have to be the one that can look at it and go, Yeah, that's right. You have to have the intuition still to be able to say, I'm pretty sure that's right, or actually, I need to do more work to make sure. You got me there. I'm going to go confirm that. Or it's the type of decision that you can just accept. As as soon as AI can just do things that you can do, that obviates the need for you. So just make sure that you are always in that loop by doubling down on some domain specific knowledge. If you're a computer programmer, you go learn how to do it. We're still going to need a lot of great computer programmers. AI is never going to replace them because understanding a high level application development process is not something right now, and AI could do it, but it's not going to do it well enough that we trust it and that it sticks. The problem is a senior software developer is going to use AI to do the first 60 hours of the task instead of hiring someone to do it. And that's already happening. And that's what we're seeing in the real world. And so one takeaway is the types of jobs that we think are going to be taken away by AI are not all, it's not always intuitive. Computer science is not something that I would have immediately jumped to, but that's actually one of the fields where it's first being really strongly felt. Fields where I would have thought it would have come are language translation, radiology. There have been a lot of studies for years, even before generative AI, that a lot of artificial intelligence models can look at scans, x-rays, and other things and identify problems based on patterns, right? It's pattern recognition a lot better than humans can. But the demand for radiologists is only going up, and the demand for language translation is going up. It's counterintuitive. And when you think about it, it's just basic economics. There's a lot of radiology that we just didn't do before. The expensive part was the human in the loop. And there's a lot of language translation that we just didn't do before because there was a human in the loop. And now humans can just do it a lot more efficiently. And so there's actually more work, right? Sometimes the economics is weird and it kind of throws you for a loop. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, actually, I can leverage AI with my domain expertise. I have to be the expert translator or radiologist, and then I can leverage AI to be to lead competitively in the market economy. And so my advice is just to start playing with it outside of your domain specific knowledge that you need to get. Play with it, see what the boundaries are. Use these tools as often as you can because you'll find a way to make what you do more efficient. And at the end of the day, it's really just management skills. I saw this insight once that AI skills, if you were talking about what do we teach in terms of AI skills, it's just management skills. How do you manage an organization? It's HR. It's how do you form a structure to where you have a manager that's responsible and that has the right people beneath them, working with them, for them, and you understand their capabilities. What does it do well? What does it not do well? You have to know these agents now pretty intimately, as well as your real employees, so that you can balance those workloads and know kind of where to place those things. So get those management skills, double down on your domain-specific expertise, and you're going to be in good shape.
If I could add one thing to that, if you would excuse the self-contradictory phrase, know what you don't know. If you're in a leadership position, you need to understand the questions that were not asked. And AI may give you wonderful analyses, but as a leader, you need to say, well, what do we not know? And then maybe AI could provide it, maybe it can't. If I can give you an example of from Walmart, their early failed, early in the time of machine learning, when they called it machine learning, they had a failed foray into the business of having pharmacies. So they had this killer, at the time, machine learning system where they could figure out inventory, what's most popular and everything else, and other stores were trying to catch up. So they said, we're going to open up pharmacies and compete with CVS and Walgreens and others. And then we're going to take data from our large superstores to find out what are the most popular toys. And we'll have only sell those most popular ones in the tiny little section we have in the pharmacy store. What are the most popular pet toys and pet foods? We'll have that. And on. They could collect all this data, have it analyzed, and put it in. And they said, we're just going to take over the pharmacy market. So they went in, and what the questions they didn't ask is, how will people perceive a Walmart as a pharmacy? And so they went in with, this is your Walmart pharmacy. What they didn't ask is how will people look at what we do and the prices we charge? Well, they expected the prices to be the same for the same thing at the superstore. Their model was we would sell exactly the same things in the superstore, but we would be the subset of the most popular items. So people expected them to be the same price. But the cost of buildings, those buildings, because they're smaller, they're less efficient, they have a higher cost of sales per square foot. They're often in more expensive areas because they're closer into downtown areas. The cost of land is more expensive. They had to charge more in order to break even or make a profit. The moment they raised the prices, people would say, hey, wait a second. This is cheaper at the superstore. Why would I buy it here when I know it's cheaper there? Whereas the perception of CVS and Walgreens and others was, oh, well, we know it's a little more expensive, but they didn't have exactly the same brands. They didn't have exactly the same models of things as sold in other stores. So it was harder for people to compare, and there was an acceptance of higher prices in that model. So even though they had a machine learning system, an AI system that gave them what they thought was a killer business plan to go in and dominate that area, it ended up that the questions they didn't ask were the critical ones that led to failure in that effort, and they ultimately pulled out. So that's how I come to the talent of knowing what you don't know what questions to ask that the analyses from AI have not answered. And maybe AI can answer it, maybe it can't, maybe you have to collect your own data, but that's an important skill that leaders will need in the age of AI.
Thank you. Thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, all of you, for being here. And we have some time now to talk, answer any questions you might have. Let's have a little bit of an open dialogue here. So, any questions? Yes. And let's get you a microphone.
Thank you. We heard a little bit of this from Dr. Seeley earlier on, but I was kind of curious to hear from the rest of the board of like, where do you see the end goal of AI? Are we completely replacing humans in certain areas? Are we doing that always having a human in the loop thing? Like in the future, when we figured out AI, what do you see the end goal being?
I can just say a lot like I just said. I think that I have no idea what the end goal of any of these companies is, right? It's to maybe dominate the industry, change the world. But as with any technological revolution, we don't know where it's going. And a lot of times, like I said, the industries we think it's going to impact aren't the industries it does. This is a big deal. This is not something that we can just kind of sweep under the rug. I think this is a drastic change. But at some point it just becomes a political issue, right? I mean, if it's going to replace jobs, it's no longer a technological issue. It's now a policy kind of issue. And it will come down to what do we want as a society for AI to be? So I'm not too worried about it just replacing jobs wholesale or people. What it will probably do is upend different corners, and there'll be places where all of a sudden that's just not a need anymore. But I do think that it's opening areas. And in my field, for example, in accounting, for years, most firms just haven't been able to hire enough qualified accountants, and it's still the case. Pretty much anyone that wants that type of job and graduates with a degree can get that job. And right now, what we're going to see, I think, is AI producing enough efficiency that we maybe start to level that labor market a little bit, where people can now finally fill the needs of the market. And that might soak up some of the computer science degrees. I don't know. Just making something up. So I'm not worried about it, but I think that it pays to pay attention to the labor market and see where the trends are going.
I just want to add on real quick a little bit because I'm a little bit more worried than Noah. So because I remember the time before the internet. So I'm old enough to actually remember that. So, and when I think how far we've come from I don't know who said it earlier that back then we could have downloaded the entire thing. Was that you, Jeff, or Noah? One of you. So that's true. I mean, it's advanced so much that wasn't even imaginable to us in the mid 90s. So now we're here at AI, and it's only been what, 2-3 years now since we've had that, and we can already do all of these great things. So we don't really know where the end is. And I know Eugene said earlier that there will always be a human in the loop. I hope so, but I'm not that confident that there will always be humans in the loop. I don't know where this is gonna end. It's a scary thought, but I hope that we'll find a solution to it because humans are really smart and they can find solutions to difficult problems. So let's hope for the best.
Rachel kind of touched up a little bit on like how AI might erode professional expertise a little bit. And I guess I'm just kind of curious on like different cases, whether it's like a court case or someone like an expert needing to provide information, or maybe it's to investors or to a company so that they can gain additional insight. To what extent do we feel like it might be better to turn to AI for that expertise now rather than a human expertise in that field if we're seeing that erosion?
It's hard to know right now. We see some real specific instances. I mean, this is a little bit more obvious, but don't let AI do your work for you without verification. I think verification skills are extraordinarily important, but we see that ability eroding. That's a hard enough skill for us to teach students. It's a hard enough skill for us to stay current in the age of misinformation, right? What are the sources you trust? How do you find those? And that seems to be a situation that's always changing. We've got the court case from, I think, beginning of 2023 of the lawyers who relied on AI for their case law for the brief that they were presenting. And they even asked the AI, is this real? You know, oh, yes, you can find it in Westlaw. Well, okay, great. So that's a definite skill where there's an issue, but we're seeing it other areas too, where it's oftentimes right now these tiny small things, but small things add up. So I think that remains to be seen, but verification, critical thinking skills for sure, and then some of these smaller skills at this point.
Thank you. We have time for one more.
Yeah. So we heard a lot about transparency and the need for that. We heard a lot about ethics, like corporate ethics. We heard a lot about individual morality. And right now, I feel like we're in a unique stage where we're shaping the outcome of how AI impacts our society. But I don't think I think no one would disagree with me to say that we live in a very litigious world. And we live in a world where assets and information and processes are fought for and protected at great length, including a company's ability to train their AI, the data that they're using to train, the decision-making capability of their AI. So to me, that seems like a very clashing disconnect when we call for transparency, when we call for, well, how do we know what their ethics are? How do we know what their decision-making rubric is? But then us as consumers, I mean, like the amount of money raised by these AI companies is insane right now. And I know that they're protecting their information, they're protecting their data. What can I do as a consumer to help shape the future, to make sure that transparency is on the mind of Meta, of Microsoft, of OpenAI, of Google, to make sure that I'm protected instead of corporate interests?
So one thing I think is we definitely need to make sure that we're keeping these companies accountable and asking them questions about what are they doing with that. So there was an example recently of a game developer, and what they did is they asked their developers to work on some AI tools to help them design levels for the games or whatever. And what happened is, as soon as those were developed, they fired everybody because now they had AI tools that, one person could do what 10 people did before. Well, nobody told them that that's what they were doing, right? That's the kind of lack of transparency. So we need to be able to go back to companies who are doing things like that and say, hey, we're not okay with this. Like, what are you doing with that? I think the more that people demand to say, I want to know, was my decision on my loan, to what extent was that based on AI stuff versus a person that did that? I think we need to talk to legislators and stuff and ask them to start building in some of these protections where there has to at least be some kind of a revelation about that. More and more people are demanding, like for artwork or graphics or whatever, that you have to say this was generated wholly or in part by AI, so that we can decide, like, I don't want to take something that was an AI generated because I know it put an artist out of work or other kinds of things like that. But until we have people that are helping us to have that transparency, it's going to be hard for us to do that. But we need to be able to push back and say, this is what we're comfortable with AI. This is what we're not comfortable with. So those are some thoughts I had about that. I'm sure there are others.
One thing I wanted to add is I know we often belittle lawyers and our legal system and highlight their excesses, but there's good reason for us to have these legal systems. And a very interesting case going forward now, Disney and other studios are suing ChatGPT and others because they're saying you did not have authorization to use our art in training your art programs. And they can say, we can show you easily. Make a picture of Mickey and Minnie Mouse with Pluto from 2020 or something like that. And boom, it's created that. Well, how can it do that unless it trained on our copyrighted artistic material? So this is causing great concern in the art world because lots of people make money, some just enough to survive, and writing jingles and doing some artwork, and their stuff is being pulled in and used for training without authorization. So this lawsuit will help set a lot of boundaries for this, because we could imagine one extreme where they say, okay, you have to go and rebuild your database without copyrighted material. And the test will be take pictures from, and I'm an artist that has copyrighted material, and make a likeness of this or that. And if it says I can't, then you're good, or what have you. So this is a case where the legal system will, in time, I think, work us to an appropriate point where, as a society, we're comfortable. They often go too far, but this is a good case. And I think it'll be interesting to see how we work this out. And a lot of these issues will be resolved ultimately, I think, in the courts for the benefit of society.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you for your questions. And as we leave today, I have a question for you that I hope you'll take with you, which is, how can we design our use of AI so that it strengthens rather than weakens human judgment and responsibility? And so as we leave today, just wanted to thank all of you for being here, and thank you for our panel as well.